And we're live. Welcome back, everybody, to the PEO Speedwagon podcast. As always, I'm your host, Rick Johnson, joined with co-host Ryan Shapiro, president of PEOMG. We have a very special episode today as we're joined with Clint Overton. Clint is the founder of Boardroom Bullpens here in St. Louis, Missouri. And he's got a background in helping with operations at large organizations as well as some startups along the way. And we know a thing or two about that in the PEO space. It's kind of plugging the right people into the right seats and helping organizations with their operations. So, Clint, excited to have you here today, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I've seen a lot of what you guys have been doing since you launched the podcast. So excited about being here live and in person.
Yeah, it's fun to have you here. And like we were talking, it's there's an energy when we get to do this live. We do some of these virtually, but every opportunity to connect with somebody great and then do that in person is, always an added bonus.
Yeah. And I do my best to not butcher what your company's up to. So I'd love to hear maybe from you in your own words.
Give them your pitch.
What's
give them the pitch, the boardroom.
Yeah, sell it. Sell to me.
Sell to me.
Yeah, maybe just for the viewers at home, just a simple explanation of Boardroom Bullpens, what you guys are working on.
Yeah, appreciate it. I mean, really for us, my business partner and I, longtime leaders, executive operators. So him over 20 years as CFO seat, myself as a longtime operations executive. And so for us, we just took a lot of our background and experience and really just kind of boiled it down to what's been successful for us and trying to provide that out into the ecosystem. So really we start with the prospect of being a strategic advisor for an organization. So really trying to understand what they're trying to accomplish. And then once we assess where there's places that they have gaps that need to be filled, we have kind of the artillery in the bullpen to execute really any of the places where they need help.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Your background, you mentioned it's mostly in operations and leadership. What drew you to operations? It seems to be a theme for your whole career almost.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's one of those kind of funny stories. So for me, right out of college, was actually in a sales role and was working for a Fortune 100 company and really just kind of had this desire and interest in being a problem solver. And there was a job that had been open at my company for over a year. I guess there was nobody that was willing to take it except for a young guy that didn't know any better at the time. And so really just kind of launched into the idea of being right in the battlefield, so to speak, and being in a position where you can really make a lot of change happen really, really quickly. And so that was very intriguing to me personally. And just kind of went off and running from there. I mean, demonstrated a lot of competency on being able to be right in the middle of significant change in organization and then driving value. And it led to 18 more years as an operations executive at the company that I was at, and then had a chance to move on to a couple other places. But really where rapid change was happening is where people wanted me to be. And, that's really where we fit, is organizations that are under rapid change and rapid challenge. We come in kind of as the steady hand, help you evaluate where you're trying to go. And then really have built this artillery of executive leaders that we have on our bench, and then a number of managed service providers to really plug whatever people need when they need it. And hence kind of the name Boardroom Bullpens. For us, it was probably one of my few creative moments in my life. Just really thinking about, where does the most significant decisions in an organization happen strategically to happen in the boardroom? And, if you're trying to win a game, in baseball, late innings and you're in a really tough spot, what do? You go to the bullpen. So that's really what we formulated, is kind of a capability that allows us to meet companies where they're at. And it's fun to take those 20 plus years of experience of fighting the battles and then boiling it down to companies that are startups or even 20 plus year family enterprise businesses and just help them where they're at.
Yeah. Did you notice a sort of a gap in the market in terms of what you guys provide and for need for fractional leadership like that?
Yeah. So my story, just a little bit of context and background. So, as mentioned, well over 20 years in the corporate space. And then, I had kind of my moment that I think a lot of us go through where we're going through and reassessing what's important to us, what energizes us. Stepped away on my own volition in early 22. So I always call it the second hardest question I've ever asked my wife. So the first was, will you marry me in front of 100 people? The second was in a hot tub in the backyard saying, do you mind if I quit my job and figure out who I want to be when I grow up?
It's nice. It's a good, smart move to ask, though.
And so for me, I had a chance and I really wanted to do the things that I felt I was good at, what I was energized by, and got really talked into by my now business partner, who had his first fractional CFO firm in St. Louis back in 2000, the second one in 2012. He really encouraged me to say, hey, why don't you just go out and hang your own shingle, which I did that for about a year and a half. And then being kind of in the midst of it and seeing the startup ecosystem, not just locally, but in the Midwest and even further, and then even the family enterprise businesses, I really felt like there was a massive gap in terms of providing the talent resources that organizations need. I say this a lot, but I feel, just no disrespect to folks out there. I know there's a lot of good people doing really good work, but what I found is there's a lot of people hanging their own shingle and saying that they're the right solution for these organizations who are super vulnerable.
Yeah.
And really 80% of them don't really have the meaningful experience to provide the value that folks needed. And so for me, I really felt called to serve that gap, to close that gap in the space. And the second thing is a few years ago, you can probably tell by the video here, I've got a little gray hair on my head. There's a lot of people like me that had, really great corporate experiences that were leaving corporate America, wanted to do good work, but didn't want to go out and do business development. So it was kind of the intersection of those passions, which really led to the idea of starting Boardroom, which was really, how do you help these companies that are vulnerable and in need and want to be helped? And then how do you provide kind of a capability for all these, really experienced executive leaders who have tons of value to bring to the marketplace? How do you bring those together and make it easy for everybody involved? And that's really was kind of the genesis of building the company.
Yeah. What are you noticing any trends with who gets pulled off the bench to come in and help these small companies or mid-sized companies grow faster?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is that maybe just a little bit of context. I think one is it is a big decision for anybody who founds a company to let anybody outside in, right? So there's always this like really significant hump that you got to get over. But I think the easiest entry point and where we've had the most traction is typically on the finance side of the house. And even in cases when we've been brought in and the ask is something different, because what we really do is we never assume that who we're meeting with knows what they need. We really try to understand where's the organization going, what's gotten in the way, where are they trying to go, and really understand strategically what are the blockers to success. But most of these companies that need help have waited a really long time to ask for help. And the one place that you just can't put your head in the sand any further is really getting the financial picture and the financial discipline in your organization fixed. And so we've gotten a lot of traction in the fractional CFO seat, but I would just say accounting and bookkeeping are two places that a lot of companies that are growing are suffering significantly because they just kind of, I call it the eeny, meeny, miny, mo factor of like, I picked somebody in the organization and said, now you're going to be responsible for this. And it's super important to the business. And it ultimately fails. That's where we've gotten the most traction. I think the other two places where we're seeing a lot of challenges, but not necessarily there being enough self-recognition of it, is really around the human capital space. So really caring for your organization as you're growing, quite frankly, in terms of the work that you guys do on the benefit side. And then really, what are all the things that a growing organization needs to make sure that their employees are cared for properly, set up for success? And then the third thing that I think we see really consistently is that most of these organizations, as they've grown, they build the organization, the CEO or founder builds the business around themselves. So they're the expert. They're wearing 5, 6, 7, 8 different hats in the organization. And so the inability a lot of times for these leaders to be able to kind of step away and build a bench that can help the company kind of get to the next level. That's the kind of the third place I would say a lot of companies that are growing struggle with mightily.
It's interesting because I mean, several things you said there, but the last piece is kind of something in our own organization, PEOMG, we've been experiencing. We built this organization. It's grown very rapidly because of the PEO nature of it. I've kind of been at the center of it. But here over the last, with our leadership from our CEO and our other partners, Rick and Austin, we've kind of organized differently to start to create that bench knowledge in terms of things related to PEO, bench knowledge across different things, so we could get more organized and perhaps intelligently. So if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, the business will be fine, maybe better in some cases. But it took us a minute to get there. It took our CEO getting more into the day to day to figure out, like, hey, we've got too much flowing through here, and we're not getting enough value for that effort. And we're also not cross-training individuals to be able to take on greater responsibilities. And we've kind of gotten organized here at the right time, which is, in our space, the fall is an enormous, time for us to be operating at full efficiency.
Yeah. Well, one thing that's helped was implementing like an EOS and operating system. Do you help implement anything like that when you're coming into these businesses?
We don't specifically, but we certainly have a lot of folks that we know in the ecosystem that are great implementers. I mean, here in St. Louis, Kansas City is another market that we do a lot of business in as well. And so it is a great tool set. The way that I always think about EOS is it's not the playbook, but it's the framework. And a lot of organizations need a framework. It creates, I think, a lot of structure that organizations oftentimes lack, because, as you guys know, especially when you're small and you're growing, you're simply waking up every day and you're blocking and tackling against what's right in front of you. So it's very hard to kind of step back and look at the bigger picture. And so I think EOS is one of several frameworks out there that work really well to help companies. And then I think from there is, are you willing, you have the framework, but then are you willing to make kind of all the difficult decisions that you have to as a leader to identify, here's the right people in the right seats, or identifying maybe somebody who's not in the right seat in your organization. And then, it's just, frameworks don't do that for you. They create kind of a mechanism for that. But the next big step is making all those really critical and key decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's aligning people to their best and greatest use, also making sure the culture supports that they feel happy in that type of work. And you kind of touched on that with your human capital aspect. And I think when we had the opportunity to meet and have coffee and you shared about you all and what we did, that's where, I was very taken that there was this awareness to, obviously people are the greatest asset an organization has, but they don't always have them. And they don't always know that a better, more talented person being installed into their organization is the way to drive them forward. So I'm kind of curious, when you come across a business, whether that's through your marketing, referrals, what have you, what's the process like to help them understand, like, that there is a need, that there is a problem that can perhaps be addressed? Because you kind of touched on it. Some people don't really know, or what's going on they think is symptomatic of one thing and it's actually something else.
Yeah, I mean, great question. So I would say that, generally, we don't really talk to a lot of leaders who aren't at least moving in the direction of recognizing that they have a need. So, one of the things that we kind of decided a long time ago is our best use of our time and where we can make the biggest impact is when somebody at least is vulnerable enough to say, I need some help. And so, now with that, I think the bigger question you're asking there is, when you sit down with a leader who comes to you and says, I need this, is what does that conversation really look like? Right. And so, really just starts with, at the end of the day, we're all in the trust business. And so our perspective in terms of where we start is we try to get to know the human being. We try to understand the journey of what's happening in the organization. And then really just, instead of focusing so much of our energy on what they believe to be the problem that needs to be solved, is really kind of taking it back about 3 or 4 steps and really making a connection to what was the genesis of the company, what are the things that have been successful, what are the things that have been in the way. And then I think as those questions are being answered in that conversation, which feels very natural, is you start to identify places that you want to unpack a little bit further. So it just leads to, I think, a lot of those secondary and tertiary questions that you're asking to really just understand, okay, what are really, I think, getting to the heart of what the blockers of the organization are.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then I think reading it back in a way that doesn't feel like, I guess, like overly obtrusive, reading it back in a way that says, here's what I think that you're talking about. Here's what I'm understanding.
Yeah.
And so it feels more like we're working together to solve the problem as opposed to, the smartest guy or smartest gal in the room approach.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because there's a lot of vulnerability. I mean, some people could look at what you do as, right size to these organizations, but consultancy. Like,
Sure.
So sometimes I'm going to come in and tell you all the stuff you're doing wrong and what have you. And when you are in that SMB up to enterprise space, or like I said, family owned enterprise, like there is some vulnerability that is very uncomfortable to admit what you have done may not have been the best decisions. And
For sure.
And so coming with heart and a genuine desire, authenticity to help, I imagine helps a great deal with that.
I think so. And, it's interesting, kind of good, bad, or indifferent is, and we've had a chance to meet a few times to kind of get to know each other a little bit. I've really just tried to, and Ted, my business partner as well. I mean, we approach everything really from the perspective of, we're just a couple of guys that have kind of learned a lot. We've been through a lot of challenges, and we are authentically in this because we want to serve others. And I never use the word consultant, and there's a lot of reasons for that we could get into. I don't ever use the word coach. I use the word coach when I coach youth football and do other things that I have to do, right? But somebody even asked me like recently, if you have an executive that you put in with a team, are they really just doing coaching? And I said, any great executive, part of what you do is coaching.
Sure.
Like it's not a separate exercise. It should be part and parcel to what you do. But I think it's really just meeting them where they're at, trying to understand, where the biggest pain points are. And then I think the other part too is just really getting an understanding of how much change can that leader and or organization absorb at one period of time. So, we talked about this at the beginning. A lot of times when we're meeting with someone, they have waited probably too long in many cases. So it's not one thing that needs to be addressed. And, our approach really is, let's kind of unpack everything that's going on, but let's fix the most important thing first.
Sure.
And really, the most important thing may not be the thing that seems most obvious to others, but it really could be the thing that creates the most stability for the organization.
Yeah.
And so that's why finance tends to be a stabilizing force, because if you don't have good line of sight in terms of cash management, cash flow, forecasting, capacity planning, some of those things that are fundamental to running business growing, like everything else is a lot harder.
As a football guy, it's kind of like, winning solves all issues in football. It's kind of like cash flow solves a lot of things in a business.
It does.
Yeah.
It sounds like folks are coming to you from a reactionary standpoint, where it's like something has occurred, they've let it go on too long, and then it seems to be coming out of finance or that department. Do you feel like it's because that department hurts the most when it makes that sort of trip up, or it's been neglected for so long, and there's like a catalyst moment where they say, hey, we need to go do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that finance is a place that we see most frequently, but I think that any business that's growing substantially, that there are these kind of pressure points or stress markers in an organization where you can kind of only push it so far before the dam breaks, so to speak. I wouldn't say it's exactly the same for every organization in terms of like what the seminal moment is for them, but usually it is something. I hear people say this a lot of times is people won't do anything until the pain is so great that they don't have another choice.
Yeah.
And so that could be, hey, I have a high concentration risk in my portfolio of customers, and I just lost 40% of my revenue. And so therefore I'm like all of a sudden like looking at everything in a very different way, because now I have this huge dependency and that's gone out the window, right? Or it could be, hey, we're we carry a ton of inventory. We probably haven't been, evaluating our work in process properly. And so now all of a sudden what we thought we had on hand, we really don't have on hand. And so there's just so many different things, but usually what it is just sweeping something over the rug, kind of the old adage of like kicking the can down the road until you can only kick it down the road so far, because if the road ends, you kind of have to make a decision for something.
And is that a wonderful place for you guys to intercept? I guess, there is that business owner, entrepreneur mindset of like continuing to push the boundaries of what you can do with what you have, because that's kind of inherent in entrepreneurship. Be like, okay, but right here's where it's going to burst. So let's have a strategy like right here. It's kind of like, we've got man on second and third, and before you throw one more pitch, we're going to call somebody else in to get this lefty. So we're going to do this thing, because we're not going to let you throw another one, because we know what's going to happen. Yeah. So, I mean, is that where you guys serve your greatest value, or do you try to even do that further down the road, or prior to, I should say?
No, I mean, my preference would always be
earlier.
I mean, and the reason why I say that is, we come into this from the approach of think and act like an owner. So, I mean, we're business owners too.
Sure.
And, again, mentioned the fact that there's like this inherent desire to take all this experience and then the things that we've already learned, not allow people to make some of the mistakes we've seen other organizations make that we've had to go in and fix during our career. And so I think earlier is always better. And the reality is conversations are free. And so that's the way that I always think about this too, is that if we have an initial conversation with somebody, spend an hour with them just to understand what's happening in the business, that may not lead to anything that has to happen right now, but I do think you owe it to yourself, to the people that work for you, potentially to your customers, that if you really recognize that you're hitting kind of a ceiling or nearing a ceiling, let's have the conversation before it's painful, because we can avoid a ton of pitfalls and other challenges that might be very difficult to fix.
Right. Yeah, and I can see that. That's where there is enormous value, because you can serve and provide education or foresight to something that maybe is not there, because maybe it bursts here and maybe it gets really painful here, but you can turn it around. But if you educate all the way back here and just say, hey, as it starts to get a little tense, that's when you should pick up the phone. Like, that's when we should start having more meaningful conversations.
No doubt about it. And, we didn't really kind of get into this at the beginning, but the way that we constructed the company was really meeting companies where they're at in their trajectory. And so, there's a lot of different ways that we do that, but one is on the fractional and interim executive front. But we now have the capability to actually go get a full-time executive as well, which is something, very new for us. But recognizing that the first time you need a CFO in an organization, the first time you need a CTO, when you first need that level of talent and expertise and strategy in your organization, the first week or month or quarter that you need that person probably doesn't need to work 40 hours a month for you. You probably don't need, when you first need like a strategic leader in a specific discipline in the room, you probably shouldn't be paying them $300,000 a year if you're a, $75 million a year business or a $50 million a year business. So it's really kind of a crawl, walk, run approach with us, where it's, let's get you what you need when you need it, and then kind of grow into those other resources. And then at some point in the future, 12, 18, 24 months down the road, you now know enough about that specific function and discipline that you can probably just go hire the person or build the function internally. But there's no reason to create all that overhead and expense and challenge for your organization before it's needed. And what we find that happens a lot of times is that you wait too long, and then you feel like you have to make a decision. And then the decision that you make is still a short-sighted decision, because you're like, okay, well, I need somebody in here now.
Right.
And who can we go get? And the mindset's always, I need to go get somebody full-time. And then they typically underhire the talent that they actually need. So our focus is all about meet you where you're at. And one of our taglines is, right talent, right price, right time, which I think says a lot about how we think about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I love that approach. Sounds like, I mean, we talk about our organization and the different things we're working on. We wear tons of hats at PEOMG, and it makes a lot of sense to sort of like incrementally grow that position out until it's fully needed. You said that they would often find what was it? They would bring in talent that might be underskilled for the role they need. I thought they might have made like a reactionary decision and overshot on the talent or something, and they are pressured to have somebody come into the spot. And all of a sudden they do bring in that really high value person to try to solve all the problems.
Mm-hmm.
But again, like you said, 12 months, 24 months, they're only working on a few things at a time to get it working. It's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And I can give kind of a specific example that might be helpful too. So and again, I know we've used the CFO example a lot and
Sure.
we do way more than CFOs. So I want to make sure that people understand that too. But the finance seat's always one that is pretty commonly relatable for folks, right?
Yeah.
And so, a lot of organizations as they're growing, they have somebody who's the office manager or what have you, who, ends up doing some bookkeeping. And then all of a sudden that person does more and more bookkeeping and they call them a controller. And then all of a sudden there's a decision made that, we really need a CFO. And so it's either I'm going to promote this person, I'm going to give them a little bit more money. And then suddenly they're like a strategic leader in an area where they've never been developed by somebody who's actually been in that role before.
Yeah.
That usually doesn't work out. Or they'll say, you know what, we really feel like we need a CFO because they don't really know because they've never had a CFO in their organization, but we can only spend this much money. So I'm going to go out and put a salary out there that I can afford.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to put a job posting for a CFO because I have a CFO need. Mm-hmm. But then I'm expecting to get that type of talent in the organization. And what you end up getting is somebody who's probably at least a level or two below that because those are the only people that'll take that salary.
Yeah.
So there's always these kind of shortcut decisions that people make that just, they believe that they're fixing a problem. And the good thing is they're trying to do something to address the shortfall, but they're making the wrong decision in many cases because they don't have enough background and experience to know how to make the right decision.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we help tremendously.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense because we have that. Like our contemporary for that scenario is an organization of 10, 12 employees gets to some inflection point where whatever that business owner, business leader perceives HR to be goes, okay, tap somebody, Joe or Joanne, you are now the HR person.
Yeah, no doubt.
They were the administrator or office manager or who knows, right? Something in an operational capacity. And then the organization continues to grow and add more people. And maybe it's fine. Maybe they're all here in Missouri and maybe Missouri's not a terribly complex state. And then that business owner goes, we're expanding. And I just hired somebody in New York and California. And now that person is instantly underwater from compliance, risk, just wherewithal, all the things that are going on.
Right.
And the shortcut often becomes to address that is maybe somebody vocalizes, maybe Joe or Joanne vocalizes and says, hey, I don't know how to do this stuff. Like what we've been doing, like payroll benefits, a little bit of this and that, and processing some stuff like I've been able to handle, but now we're in trouble. And so then they go buy a HR technology that doesn't really address the issue. It's better.
Sure.
It's more streamlined and maybe integrates a few elements and makes things better. But from a pure compliance or risk perspective, you really haven't solved anything. And so now that all still sits within the organization and it's still, and now in some ways, Joe or Joanne is worse off because they're like, well, I got you more stuff to address this. I mean, like that didn't address the issue. The issue is I don't know how to deal with California employees and mandated PTO, short-term disability, Fair Pay Act, all this kind of junk.
Yeah.
I'm still underwater. And so companies make those. And then finally, obviously a structure we think works very well is a PEO model. Doesn't work for everybody, but it does work and it does do exactly that. And it takes Joe and Joanne and keeps them in their role, empowers them, gives them more arms and legs, but actually lifts and shifts the liability and management of those compliancy pieces directly out of the business and onto the chassis of the PEO. And it's all that same story, just different verse.
It is. And I think I started a few years ago when I went out on my own. I just wrote a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. And so I still do that. And I find it as an outlet, but a lot of it is just like writing about personal experiences and the like inherent like hamster wheel challenges that you see out there.
Yeah.
And one of those is, and I say this a lot, is everybody's looking for a shortcut, that shortcuts don't exist. And so, but everybody believes there's a shortcut, and everybody thinks that they can kind of outsmart or outrun the problem. And your example of, I've got a bad process, I'll throw technology on top of it. Like, great example, right? I mean, to me, bad process, add technology, all you've now is just amplified a bad process. And so no different, when you're making these decisions about human capital, is that, and or processes or functions, is that if you don't do it properly, then you're just creating a ton of exposure for your organization. And you're doing it like at a much more rapid rate, because as you're growing, you're amplifying the problems, you're exposing yourself to greater and greater risk. And there's always this mindset is that it's not a problem until it's a problem. Yep. And so back to your original point a few moments ago is, don't wait until it's a problem. When you know that it's not exactly as easy as it was before, step back and evaluate it. Yeah. And then ask, if you don't know, don't assume that you have all the answers. Go find somebody who's willing to help you think through that objectively and give you some thoughts on how to fix those problems.
Yeah. And I know you're also a founder of Mercury CRM Solutions. So I just wanted to ask, is that helping put in the technology in the right way to help them solve situations like that?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. So fast follower to the launch of Boardroom was Mercury CRM. And so past experience during my Fortune 100 days, one of the gifts I had in a sales operations role was I was gifted 1,600 Salesforce licenses and said, figure out how to get an ROI on these.
Yeah, there you go.
And so sales technology was one of my responsibilities. I had no Salesforce experience, but we, very quickly assessed that there were a lot of business problems that needed to be solved, but we needed to kind of start from the backbone of what are the process issues we're trying to solve, and then how do we use Salesforce as a capability to fix that. And so we ended up, standing up a number of things that had never happened in the organization, where we ended up getting all 1,600 of those licenses used, and we did it through this very small and mighty team. And so the guy that I would say that I talked into leading our Salesforce implementation at the company that I worked for almost 20 years, he and I have stayed in contact. And so when we were building Boardroom, one of the things that just kind of resonated with me was he had a Salesforce agency he had sold. He was working as a solo guy again. I reminded him we're not getting any younger and that you can't scale yourself. And I said, hey, this is a perfect fit for what we're doing with Boardroom. It's the same kind of ideal client profile, $5 to $100 million, 25 to 250 employees. And it starts with the same thing that we did 20 years ago, in our corporate experience, which is start with identifying what the problem is, build a great process, and then utilize technology to kind of to catapult that. And so what we did with Mercury was we took this idea of what we did 20 years ago, where we built this, small team of 4 people that supported 1,600 users and kind of turned on all these capabilities. But we did it from the standpoint of, in order for it to work, you've got to make sure that you understand what business problem you're trying to solve. You have to make sure that you have a process designed. You have to have somebody who can extrapolate what the business needs and what the technology needs to do, which is one of the biggest gaps in why most technology implementations fail. And then we realized we've got to do this in a way that's really lightweight for companies that are growing, because Salesforce, if you're using it, is a fairly expensive proposition, but it also has the greatest kind of capability set that's out in the marketplace. And so what we did is we said, okay, just like we did on the Boardroom side, which was just buy a certain number of hours every month, and we'll be your full suite team, both for an implementation or to support your organization. And so it just kind of fit perfectly with what we're doing with Boardroom.
Yeah, so it's a similar approach of right-sizing first, and then as they grow into it ultimately.
That's right.
Okay.
100%, yeah.
That's cool. That's very exciting.
Nice. And when did you start Mercury? How many years?
So we launched Boardroom in January of last year. Mercury was a month after that.
A month after, okay.
Yeah. So and
you were real patient.
Yes. Yeah. You know what? If you're going to jump in the deep end of the pool, you just might as well just go for it, right?
Yeah. Well, that first month was going so great with Boardroom. You were like, let's just do another one right away. No, I love that. Well, thank you. I mean, I think your insights from operational leadership perspective are fantastic. I know our listeners absolutely love that kind of content as well. And it's great to see sort of the merging of like, how what PEOs are doing as well as what fractional leadership can provide to small businesses as well. And, the conversation to speak with you sort of came out of us grabbing coffee not too long ago, but also the overlap of our industries and just kind of how we're both sort of helping the same size organizations with a lot of similar needs to some degree who just need to find a better pathway forward. So thank you, Clint. I really appreciate you coming on.
No, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah.
Enjoyed the conversation a ton.
This has been fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thanks, my friend.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah.
Appreciate the time. Thank you so much.